But before Carter could finish his sentence, Ampy walked right back through the door. She admitted that she had grown far too worried waiting alone and wanted to make sure Gomer was not in serious trouble. Noting how annoyed Sergeant Carter had seemed, Gomer tried to reassure her, explaining that Sergeant Carter had simply given him a few extra tasks to complete, such as moving a nearby pile of sand from one spot to another, and then moving it right back to where it originally started. Ampy was utterly astonished by this, asking why on earth anyone would be ordered to move sand back and forth for no practical reason. Gomer innocently replied that he had to do it simply because Sergeant Carter said so. Ampy realized with dismay that Gomer was being punished on her account and expressed deep regret for causing him such trouble. Sergeant Carter stepped in, politely but firmly informing Miss Taylor that civilians were not allowed to converse with Marines while they were performing disciplinary details. He offered to show her a quick shortcut to the main gate, guiding her down the outer road where she could catch a public bus into town. Aunt B, feeling distressed by the loud shouting and the strange punishment she had witnessed, reluctantly agreed and walked out toward the front gate. Outside the main entrance of Camp Henderson, a popular radio personality named Johnny Clark was conducting a live broadcast for his show, titled Johnny Clark at Large. He was speaking into a microphone, surrounded by audio equipment, interviewing various visitors and relatives of the servicemen stationed at the base. As Ampy walked out the gate, looking visibly flustered, Johnny Clark spotted her and politely asked if she would mind speaking to his radio audience for a brief moment about her visit. Ampy did not hold back. She declared to the microphone that she had never been so shocked and surprised in all her life. She explained that she had merely come to visit a dear young man, only to encounter a sergeant who was shouting, screaming, and ordering nonsensical tasks like moving sand back and forth. She added that the sergeant had practically pushed her down the road on her way out. Johnny Clark listened in amazement, asking for clarification on who had done the shouting. Ampy expressed that back in her hometown, if a man behaved in such a rude and aggressive manner, nobody would have anything to do with him, recognizing a highly entertaining story for his audience. Johnny Clark pointed out that their radio time was running short. He asked Aunt B if she would be willing to appear on his televised evening show the following night to share her full story. Aunt B, eager to stand up for fair treatment, agreed to appear on the program before heading back to her hotel. By the next morning, news of the broadcast had traveled fast through the military chain of command. Sergeant Carter found himself in deep trouble with the base commander, who was deeply concerned about the negative public image being created on local television. Returning to the barracks early that morning, Carter knew he had to completely alter his approach to avoid losing his rank. At 5:30 in the morning, Sergeant Carter walked into the quiet sleeping quarters of the platoon. Instead of his usual thunderous wake-up shout, he walked gently down the aisle, speaking in an extraordinarily soft, cheerful tone. He called out musically to the men, announcing that it was time to wake up, rise, and shine, and welcome the dawning of a lovely new day. He stopped beside Gomer's bunk, gently shaking his shoulder and softly repeating his name. Gomer opened his eyes slowly, looking up at his sergeant in utter disbelief. Gomer asked if the sergeant had called him, pointing out that he had not heard any hollering. Carter maintained a wide, rigid smile and explained that he had chosen not to holler. Gomer looked closely at Carter's face and asked if something was wrong with his lips, noting that they were stretched out in a very strange shape. Carter explained through clenched teeth that he was smiling, asking Gomer if he had ever seen anyone smile before. Gomer innocently replied that he had, but it just looked rather unusual on Sergeant Carter. Carter instructed all the men to gather outside on the street in 3 minutes for morning drills, maintaining his soft and overly polite manner. As Carter walked away, Corporal Boyle pulled him aside, asking if he was having a breakdown or if this nice guy routine was part of some new plan. Carter admitted in a hushed whisper that he was practicing for when Miss Taylor returned. He explained that after a stern meeting with the colonel, he realized he had to demonstrate a completely renewed, kind, and patient personality to convince the lady not to ruin his reputation on television that night. Outside on the drill field, Sergeant Carter put the men through their paces with unprecedented gentleness. When Gomer accidentally stumbled because he had taken extra time searching for his lost belt, Carter did not yell. Instead, he praised Gomer for providing an honest excuse and sweetly suggested that next time he place his belt right beside his bunk, so he would not miss it. The rest of the platoon stared in complete bewilderment, convinced their sergeant had lost his mind. A short while later, Ampy arrived back at the training grounds to check on Gomer. Sergeant Carter spotted her immediately and rushed over with an enormous, warm greeting, welcoming her aboard and inviting her to watch the platoon perform their low-crawl exercise. Ampy looked across the field and spotted Gomer crawling through the dirt. Excited to see him, Ampy waved her hand and shouted a friendly greeting across the field. Gomer looked up in surprise, losing his grip on a training exercise device he was holding. Realizing potential danger of the mishandled equipment, Sergeant Carter's natural instincts completely overrode his calm facade. Within a fraction of a second, Carter snapped back to his true self, roaring at the top of his lungs, calling Gomer a complete numbskull, a lame brain, and a knucklehead for pulling such an unsafe stunt. Ampy rushed over, appalled by the sudden explosion of anger. She asked why Sergeant Carter was shouting so fiercely at the poor boy again. Gomer, realizing his mistake, honestly defended his sergeant, admitting that he had made a major error and that Sergeant Carter had every right to be upset with him. Carter tried to quickly regain his friendly composure, patting Gomer on the shoulder and softly saying that Gomer was just being a little naughty. Ampy looked at Carter intently and asked if this was truly the kind of leadership he thought was best. Carter finally sighed, dropping the fake gentle persona entirely. He admitted candidly that he simply could not keep up the act. He declared that he was a tough Marine sergeant, that he would never be a soft-spoken pushover, and that he fully intended to have Gomer digging ditches and doing push-ups until he learned to perform his duties properly and safely. Later that evening, the Marines gathered around the television set in the recreation room to watch the live broadcast of the Johnny Clark Show. Sergeant Carter stood near the back, nervous and tense, fully expecting Aunt Bee to publicly denounce him before the entire city. On the screen, Johnny Clark introduced Miss B. Taylor from Mayberry, welcoming her to the stage. He brought up her previous comments regarding the harsh treatment she had witnessed at camp. Henderson and asked her to describe her experience with Sergeant Carter to the audience. Ampy adjusted her glasses and addressed the cameras directly. She recalled how initially she had viewed Sergeant Carter as an ill-tempered tyrant who spent all his time yelling and assigning seemingly pointless tasks. However, she went on to explain that after having a long and meaningful conversation with Gomer, her entire perspective had changed completely. She realized that she had been judging the military purely from a civilian point of view. Gomer had explained to her that no matter how loud Sergeant Carter shouted or how many push-ups he assigned, it was done entirely out of deep care for his men, ensuring they stayed disciplined, focused, and safe. She concluded by stating that Sergeant Carter had a vital job to do, because without his firm guidance, he would end up with a platoon full of knuckleheads. The entire recreation room erupted into cheers and applause. Corporal Boyle turned to Carter, grinning as he noted that Miss Taylor had made him look like an absolute hero. Sergeant Carter let out a massive sigh of relief, his heart full of genuine gratitude for the kind woman from Mayberry. The following morning, the sun shone brightly over the camp once again. Ampy prepared to take her bus to Fresno, stopping by Sergeant Carter's office alongside Gomer to say a proper goodbye. Sergeant Carter greeted her with sincere warmth, thanking her deeply for her kind words on the television broadcast and complimenting her on how wonderful she had looked on screen. Ampy smiled warmly, expressing her delight that they could part as true friends. As she looked around Sergeant Carter's office, her sharp eyes noticed the dusty windows. She commented on how grimy they appeared and noted that she still had an hour and a half before her. Bus departed. before Carter could even process her words.